Hello, welcome back to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba, your host. Thanks for joining us. All right, we've got David Nage, Managing Director at Apeiron Ventures. All right, David, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, and I hope I didn't butcher your last name.
Thank you, Michael. It's David Nage, but you did a good try there.
Nage. Okay, great. Got it. All right, David, I'm really excited for a lot of reasons to have you on the show. I want to step back, give you a platform to tell us about you, tell us about Apeiron Ventures, what you do, and the vision, and where we're going in your space.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. I've been in the family office world roughly about 10 years now. I had a bit of a catalytical moment before the financial crisis in 2008 when a friend called me from a hedge fund here in New York and told me that his principal was going to shut down the hedge fund and effectively form a family office to run his own money. I did not know what that meant at the point in time, and so I went into a wild case of diligence and reading everything I could about what a family office was, and realized through a lot of historical references that family and family offices were at the forefront of technology innovation. And I always like talking about the story between Arthur Rock and Sherman Fairchild. If it wasn't for Sherman Fairchild giving Arthur Rock $2 million and basically bringing his team into Fairchild Semiconductor with the likes of Bob Noyce, we might not have Intel today. And so families really have had the ability to be catalysts for growth and innovation in this country and around the world. And so I developed a thesis, and I went out and I started meeting as many of those family office principals as I could. Effectively now, Apeiron is a family office. I've been focusing on what I characterize as the efficiency revolution. And what that means to me is that over the course of the last decade or so, we've seen boom and busts of technology where we've seen iterations around clean technology and sustainability in 06, 07, 08. And effectively, a lot of those businesses were being funded by VCs. And a lot of those businesses were running very heavily CapEx and OpEx businesses that really didn't have a payback period. They were heavy construction, they were solar, they were manufacturing. And now what we have today is iterations around Internet of Things and sensors and analytics and machine learning and blockchain. And we're able to create efficiencies and cut our energy costs and create better supply and logistic chains around the world. And it's a very interesting time because the payback periods, because these businesses are cap light in many instances, could be south of 2 years. So my focus at Apeiron is finding these companies, whether they're a seed or Series A company. We like to try to put in some capital into these businesses and help them grow. I feel that small businesses, especially in this country, need as much capital and also much acceleration as possible. As we all know, small and medium-sized businesses are the job creators in this country. And so I feel that to be able to support those is incredibly important for this country. And so that's kind of what we focus on. We're focusing on businesses, as I said, that don't necessarily have a sector, but definitely have a focus on, as I said, IoT, analytics, machine learning. Blockchain is a very big space that we're spending a lot of time on. And those are the areas that I find incredibly interesting as an investor these days.
Are those the focus points for the emerging technology that you're seeing as the best place to invest in, or is there something else beyond the general topics you just mentioned? I mean, those are some specifics, but we both know that there's a lot of drill down in each one of those topics.
Oh, absolutely. And when I talk about sensors, and I'm talking about supply and logistics, I'm talking about active RFID technology that allows you to track your produce and your product along the complete supply chain and using things like smart contracts and blockchain to be able to really have complete product traceability. Those are, very specific instances. But in terms of other areas that I find incredibly interesting, in one of the areas I'm starting to learn a lot more about is genomics. The capacity for our own body to be able to be scanned through our genes and be able to come up with therapies so we no longer have to depend on orphan drug makers, I think is an incredibly interesting capacity. And when I think about these things are actually starting to happen. These are not kind of what I would call Star Trek, kind of in the future, the Jetsons where we're all in flying cars. These things are starting to happen now. These iterations are live. When we talk about supply and logistics and we talk about things like blockchain, there was a massive press release that IBM and Maersk are joining forces to come up with systems and protocols in place. So big companies, not just small companies, but big companies are really taking a look at some of these emerging technologies to deploy into their processes, become much more efficient. And I definitely see many, many applications that are live today that are real.
You know, all the things that you mentioned that you're talking about today have to do with big data and the warehousing and the security of this big data. What are your thoughts about, say, private clouds versus public clouds or hybrid clouds, but having that industry sector, the private cloud industry sector, are you looking into anything in that world?
Yeah, there's areas around, if you think about the data that we all are producing every day when we go on our laptops and our phones, and, people are collecting that data, whether it's Amazon or if you're going to Walmart's website, everyone's collecting data, and there's petabytes of data that are floating through to the cloud. And so we've seen many instances where, unfortunately, that data is not protected. We've seen that because of centralization. We've seen iterations where 143 million of our records were hacked and stolen by Equifax recently. There's a big kind of discussion, as an investor and also someone who's trying to think about kind of the macro dynamics, is what's the difference between decentralization and centralization? If we keep all of our data in one stored location, does that make it more successful, even if you have the best encryption possible? And my answer to that, I believe, is yes. And so I've become much more, in favor of decentralized data, where it's no longer just in one place, but it's across the system, and we're using the most sophisticated processes like SHA-256 and heavy encryption that our governments are using on a regular basis to protect that data. But you're correct. Data is kind of the, what I would call the kind of the machines and the cogs of the 30s and 40s that kind of made this country run. Data is the kind of the cogs that make this country and this economy run today.
So I take it it's going to be the difference between kind of a hybrid. You've got your private cloud information, but you've got encrypted that you pop out to a public cloud and bring it back and forth. Because everything that you're mentioning is somebody's going to say, I don't want everybody to see all of it because some of it's my proprietary stuff. So
right.
I'm getting that there is a market there that surrounds everything you just mentioned that you're investing in.
Yeah, there's definitely considerations around what we would call kind of private blockchains or private clouds and public and kind of decentralized open networks. You're correct. The big corporations, that we're seeing, especially some of the banks, are having discussions around private blockchains because there's trade secrets. If you're a shipping and logistics company, there are trade secrets that give you an edge comparable to your competitors. Mm. And do you want that completely open source? Do you want everyone to see that? And so, yes, there are conversations and there are iterations today that are going around private blockchains and private clouds versus public. At the end of the day, I think you're right that we will come to a consensus probably in the next year or two, whether we go fully public or we have many small private clouds and many private small blockchains. I don't know the answer to that yet, but I'm thinking that overall, if we use the computing power of the entire world, I think, if we have the ability to do an open source, I think we're going to be much better off.
Why should family offices focus more time, research, energy, and technology versus lower middle market private equity?
Yeah, it's a great question because, I personally see that a lot of the family offices, the peers that I talk to on a regular basis, still look at lower middle market private equity. And there's nothing wrong with, working with a family-run business that's generating, 1, 5, 10 million of EBITDA and coming in and helping them grow, get more salespeople in force. But at the same time, a lot of the emerging technology that I look at on a regular basis, I have a feeling is going to have a disruption on those core economy pieces. Come the day where, we have the ability to have direct-to-consumer processes instead of having to go to a store. We're seeing, obviously, the death of malls has been speculated. Do I want to necessarily have to go to a store and try to buy merchandise, or do I want to be able just to, go on my computer or go on my phone and just have everything automatically delivered to me? Do I want to be able to go to the supermarket and have to buy produce, or do I want my refrigerator to have QR codes on all of the food I have and be able to automatically know when my milk is going bad and have it delivered to me the next day? There's, obviously things that are happening very quickly, obviously everyone knows about Moore's law, we've been on an evolution course where it's obviously the trajectory is going higher and higher. And I just personally think that I'd rather be at the precipice of innovation and what's happening in innovation versus being kind of in technology and businesses that were 30, 40, 50 years old by now. I'd rather be at the leading edge versus on the legacy side.
David, we need to end it there, but come back on the other side of the break because I have more questions about being at the bleeding edge of investment and technology for you on the other side, all right?
Will do.
All right, David Nage, Apeiron Ventures, Apeiron Ventures.com. We'll be right back. Segment brought to you by Tycon Partners. You've been listening to CEO Money with Michael Yorba. Welcome back to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. All right, talking with David Nage, Apeiron Ventures, ApeironVentures.com. All right, David, when we left, we were talking about being on the bleeding edge of technology, investing, trend setting for looking to the future. All investing, especially stuff that starts out as illiquid, is what you do, has got to be thought out to predict, really, what is going to happen next for an economic trend or a market silo that's going to take off. Because you're not doing this. I mean, otherwise you just buy bonds or buy, farmland, and that's not what you're doing. So take us down the blockchain alley about what is going to happen next, where you see the big breakthroughs in investment, in investment ideas and investment concepts that you're leading the charge in.
Yes, I'm here, Michael.
What I was saying to the audience is this, that you have led the charge of being an innovator, a thought leader in picking the next trend of investment, mainly because you have to. You make investments that are illiquid in nature in the beginning and then forecast where economic trends are going to pay off down the road. In order to do that, you really got to be right on the money because there's a lot of it at stake and you can't afford to be wrong. So tell me where you see the next pop going, and I know blockchain is a good place to start.
It is a good place. I've spent the last 16 months really looking into the blockchain space, and what I see is just massive innovation. But I want to be very careful with the listeners out there, and I think most people would appreciate that blockchain and cryptocurrency is, for most intensive parts, probably going to have some sort of a black swan or a capitulation in the next foreseeable future. We don't know when, but what we've seen is just a massive amount of what we call ICOs that have come to market over the last 6 or 8 months. We've had about 1,300 of these initial coin offerings, which is a new iteration of what we would call, kind of almost IPOs, but these are digitized. And so, there's been a massive amount of these initial coin offerings, and we have, people investing a lot of money, billions of dollars, into just predominantly white papers. Now, for me, as an investor, I can't necessarily do that. I have to see a minimal viable product or an MVP to really be able to discern if something is real or not. And that's not necessarily easy per se in the blockchain space. But overall, what I think is going to happen in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space is that there's going to be a capitulation in the next maybe 3-6 months. I think the SEC and the CFTC have been very open and have been very gracious with their approach to the space. But they've acknowledged that a lot of the companies that are doing these ICOs don't really pass what's called the Howey Test.
Right.
And the Howey Test is obviously a way that we're going to be able to discern if something is a security versus a utility. And a lot of these that are saying they're utility are actually security, and they're probably going to get in some significant liability trouble. Now, there's going to be,
that shakeout is going to be good for the industry because
it's going to be great. And
yeah,
we all look forward to that.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen is after that crash or after that burn, out of the ashes, what we saw in the late 90s after the dot-com bubble is that you saw the evolution and the growth of things like Amazon and PayPal and Google. These are all companies that are obviously in our wheelhouse and we use every single day, but they came out of those ashes in the late 90s and early 2000s, and they came to be the leading companies in the world. And we think that's going to happen here in the blockchain space. We think there's going to be considerable amount of innovation. And some of the areas, again, that I'm really focused on, remittance. There are over 2 billion people on this planet that are what we call unbanked. They don't have access to a bank. There are places in, there are countries, parts of our world like Venezuela, where people are having to get paid every 2 days because their currencies are fluctuating at such a rapid pace and you have such high inflation. There are places throughout the world that are really in need of something like this that provides people the ability to have control over their money and their currency. The unbanked and the finance side is definitely an area. The other area that I'm spending a lot of time, again, as I iterated on, is supply and logistics. The ability to finally be able to manage a whole supply chain. And companies, big companies like Walmart and Kroger and Wegmans and a lot of the other big retailers lose billions of dollars a year on bad produce that's coming to their doorstops. And they're tired of that. And they want to be able to have solutions so they can find a way to actually manage that supply and logistics. They can see where the faults are. They can see what processes need to be fixed, and blockchain is going to be able to provide that. And there are already companies that are doing things, that are doing pilots with major companies out there to provide that access and that capacity.
David, let me interrupt you for a second. We're out of time, but I want to do this right now. You have access to do the due diligence that makes sure that people who do come onto the show in this space have already been vetted. And I wanted to see if I can just invite you to come back, and some of these companies that run through your door that you see are good, if you would be so kind as to bring them with you as your guest in the future. Would that be okay?
Sure. I'd be happy to, Michael.
Good. All right, let me do this. I've got to sign off because I've got a hard break right now. Please, contact info for you, for people that are in the audience so they can reach out to you and find out about what you're doing and if they can participate with you. Sure.
Great way to reach me is on email. It's david@apeironventures.com, and that's APEIRON Ventures with an S.com. That's a great way to reach me. Or on LinkedIn, you could just search my name, David Nage, Nage, and I'm 24/7 around the clock. I'm happy to, take people's requests and emails, and happy to help out wherever I can.
Great. I'll have Fish reach out to you after the show, and let's see if we can work something out.
Very good, Michael, and thank you again.
My pleasure. David Nage, Apeiron Ventures. This segment has been brought to you by Tycon Partners.